Welcome to Fast Forward by HTEC and groundbreaking ideas, top thinkers, some of the best world disruption stories. And now we are having a great chance actually to find out great new stories, fast moving stories with Fabrizio Ballarini, right? I hope I'm pronouncing right. You know, I wasn't a long time traveling to Italy. So
yes, correct. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, the name is perfectly spelled, I would say. So yeah, thanks for having me here.
Thank you. I'll be your host, Niko Slavnic, and we're gonna ask, the 5 big questions, moving around 5 big animals in a way, discussing about the global things with Nassim Taleb Black Swan theory, discussing a little bit about markets that you are working in with blue ocean and sharks in blue ocean because it's quite competitive on the markets. We're going to talk about purple cow, not only Milka but actually Seth Godin, purple cow, talking about the company and products, and moving to unicorn stories because you're coming from the amazing unicorn company also, and a personal approach that's most important at the end. How the butterfly wings, how the revolution is, how people are making actually the big changes. If you look from the global perspective, and since we cannot travel, a very simple question. You're based in London, so I always have to ask, when talking people from London, what's the weather? Is it raining, or is it getting better now in Corona time?
Has been exceptionally nice, I think, since we are forced to stay home, right? The last few days have been amazing. So I think there's a bit of, but it's actually positive, because if you have to stay home and it's not nice outside, it's even worse, right? So yeah, London weather is the same, I would say, but we can't complain in the past few days. Yeah.
In the past few days, great. So at least weather is something that's really global. We are mostly it's shared more or less equally in Europe. And some more colder or let's say sunnier places we have. But definitely there, if you move from weather, which trends do you see moving now in this period of time, moving really fast forward? Is there something, even out of the industry that's influencing that you see, because you're great expert also in growth? What do you see moving fast forward? That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's probably obvious, right? But the people not being able to travel has kind of accelerated the need of accessing to talent and people everywhere in the world a bit faster than what we used to do, right? This is definitely something that back in time company were still spending a relatively amount of time thinking about, as opposed to now that they can action on it relatively quickly. I remember, we still invest in in our global expansion. For instance, at Wise, we have offices now, in multiple countries, but there have been more instances these days where, A, we are flexible, but B, we can access a bit faster to talent because, the talent is available, and now it's more widely understood that to some extent that you can function within globally relatively well. Obviously, there are tax implications, there are time zone implication, but this concept I think is really powerful, because especially for countries that are probably less lucky in terms of talent, or not that there are countries where talent is worse, it's just countries where maybe the startup scene or the ecosystem isn't that developed in some industries. So in these days you can access to talent all over the world a bit more flexibly, I would say. But you could do it probably even 2 years ago in equal way. It's just that now is okay to do it, and the people feel confident in doing it, and they actually make it work, right, to some extent. So that's, I think, quite exciting, because similar to how at Wise we try to build finance without geographical borders. I think this concept is important, because at some point it will allow people to contribute to exciting companies, exciting missions, regardless of whether they are located in a location that is very hip and famous, as opposed to a location that is probably less well known and less pumped in the startup scene, but still you can contribute meaningfully to any mission, right?
Yeah, it's big changes, exactly like you said. I would say the fintech lately, even with the startups. But you were actually one of the pioneers with TransferWise, now Wise. Even I would say in very early days of blockchain. Talking about the finance and distribution of money in a way, but really helpful. And I remember talking to Estonian companies. Transferring money was since they started. It was never a problem for Estonians. Traveling globally and things now. And it's really bringing a revolution in finance perspective, but also doing a lot of good things. I remember sending money abroad used to be super expensive, especially for higher amount of money, where the monopoly was there, or duopoly, let's say, before. But now we can almost talk about a revolution in the Fintech going on. Can we call it this way? Yeah.
I think it is happening in our industry to some extent quite fast, and is kind of well known. But there are other few industries that are like these days. There's a lot of excitement even in the food industry, right? That before was probably the most traditional thing. And I come from Italy, where my mother goes to shop every morning, getting fresh food every morning, right? And so I guess this is happening across the board. I guess in finance, the exciting bit, at least in my view, has been few countries and few regulators that have kind of welcomed this kind of innovation, and have really made it easier for companies to access to certain type of licenses, or to build certain type of business that before was probably a bit more complex. And that's exciting, because around this, when there has been innovation in this front, we have seen that companies tend to do better and expand faster in some of these geos, right? And in some of these markets than before, where maybe there were more blockers in order to access to, even to be regulated, to function in a given market. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So globally, we see moving already from globally. So it's not about just one industry, but the principle of startups and growth can be implemented even in traditional like food industry. And so learning from one industry, moving to another, I believe that's also big learnings, that there's no conservative, how to say, industry. It's just the matter of time. Where I usually say it's not only about the size of the companies, but it's about the speed of the companies moving in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, we have seen even in our industry that there have been many times where people thought that that was it. The game couldn't be improved, right? Or there was no chance for another player. Yet still to date, we see people popping up, and if they focus really well on a problem and they are successful in solving it, they still have a chance to disrupt it, right? As opposed to maybe a few years back, where maybe there was a bit less of an understanding that some area could be disrupted that easily. Yeah.
And well, when we talk about exactly this black swan, the theory of low probability and high impact by Nassim Taleb, he was explaining in this way, actually, that there's many changes that we don't see, especially in our operational, let's say, daily busy Zoom mail jobs, to see the really big picture sometimes. So it can surprise us, or it can surprise some of the big companies how fast actually the small mouses are stealing the cheese, and they're not mouses anymore. Actually, they can grow quite fast and move even to different industries. Yeah, but if you move to also industries, or let's say markets, or how we call it, what do you see as the biggest changes, let's say, on the market at the moment? Do you think it will still speed up, that I don't know, banks will become obsolete someday with all their big buildings, or how do you see it?
I'm probably not going to comment on the buildings, which is probably to be seen. But in terms of like products and services, like there are a lot of banks that are still partnering and competing quite meaningfully everywhere, right? So like this disruption hasn't completely wiped out other like that's not the case, right? Is a bit is a bit different maybe that us comparing Google with like news, right? News advertising, right? Or like paper advertising. That's been maybe a bit more dramatic to some extent, but yeah, I think like there's a mix of things from like companies that partner with existing players, companies that completely go on their own, and then companies that offer services that are bundled, or in company that completely break down each and every piece of that pie, right? So there have been different approaches, and like equally, on our side, we often discuss this thing, because you know, as any company, you could pick 1,000 fights, right? But you have to be really careful on where you go, right? But equally, there are situations where like other companies have been more aggressive in expanding into other verticals than maybe we have done when we focus really on few, and still is successful, right? And so it very much depends, I guess. What is probably clear so far, I assume that like no one is really going anywhere, right? Like yet, right? That like the big players are not disappearing. Some of the new players aren't completely taking the market yet, right? Even though some of them, in some situation, they gain really meaningful market share, right? So I think it is a pretty open, and then obviously, I guess in the next few years, probably interesting to see how financially sustainable are some operations as opposed to others, right? Because we have seen a lot of, maybe less in our industry so far to some extent, but we have, like in other industry, we have seen how access to capital has kind of helped people to grow really fast and burn a lot of money. But then at some point you need to confront yourself with like what the business model is and whether it's actually a profitable business to run as opposed to acquire just customers, which is like obviously a good sign that you have a good proposition for them. But at some point you have to be commercially viable in doing so. And I assume in a few years, probably we will see whether some companies that have acquired like a lot of customers can continue to operate in that way, like regardless of, the amazing numbers, right? Which you cannot dispute. It's just like there will be probably, hopefully, I assume, right, a bit more focus on the profitability of some of these. Not because, we want less competition. Is mostly around the benefit of the customers, right? If a business is profitable, you can continue to offer a service and not increase the fee that you have to these customers. If you operate a business, if tomorrow you give a service that costs 10 and you make people pay 0, sooner or later they will need to pay 10. And then like this is not different probably from other industry, right? But this is also the case. But I guess what we haven't seen maybe is that there is still maybe in Asia, right, with this super financial app that have a bit of everything, but like on our side we haven't seen like this like player that monopolize everything to the point that they will have that advantage, right, in terms of like scale. Even like situation where people have penetrated certain verticals is still not to the level at which you have a monopoly that will allow you to control price and things like that. So it's still fairly competitive, and I think it's good, right? Because eventually for consumer this got better, right? If you look at the money transfer industry, for instance, that we have been working in for like many years, right? When I first joined TransferWise, we also these days we run a price comparison service within Wise, right? And when I joined Wise, back in time, TransferWise are like most competitive, competitors were probably in the order of like 10x more in terms of price, as opposed to now that some of them obviously with promotions and sprout of offers, they get almost as competitive as we are, or maybe like a little bit less than what they a little bit less expensive than what they used to be. So there is change happening, but it's not super fast, right? Because it's very easy to like whatever technology you use, is very easy to get to the point where you cut the cost, like the fee that you charge on top, because maybe you wanted to make a bit more money, but then at some point you really need to have an infrastructure that allows you to bring down cost with scale. And that's the really hard part, I think, regardless of like whether you're a new player or an established player. This infrastructure that moves money around the world costs money, and this is the really hard bit to solve, right? Like these days, I don't think our mission is to fix that, but we are working on it, right? We are not able to price zero yet, right? And people that price zero, they mostly do it by losing money on a transaction basis, right? Or it's just a promotion, or there are all sorts of ways that people price, but like having a virtually free infrastructure, it doesn't exist quite yet. Yet there have been crazy improvement, because even on our most historic like routes, like pound to euro and things like that, we have been dropping price a few times through the past years, right? So we continue to gain efficiencies with scale. It's just a matter of time, I assume, but some steps are really hard, right? One exciting thing that probably consumer don't realize is what sits in the back to your financial transaction, right? So you open an app, you press a button, you send money from A to B, but like there's a big difference between you doing it through like maybe Wise in UK that is integrated with central bank with the FPS scheme, or maybe doing it with another provider that work with a partner, and then they work with a partner, right? And, this is the aspect that to the final consumer is quite unclear to date, and it's probably not worth for them to know to such level of detail. But then this like historical improvement, like this milestone are really important for eventually bringing the infrastructure cost down, because allow to move money a bit quicker, right? I think like accessing funds and that part is really important to being able to drop costs. And I think that's why some countries fees are relatively more expensive than others, right? It's not that companies are necessarily making more money in some countries than others. It's just that it's a bit harder technically to move money, right? Like I'm talking about like moving money between bank accounts, right? If you then talk about cash, is even harder, I assume, right?
The currencies, but and Europe is having a lot of choices here, let's say, compare. And then when you look globally, it will be interesting, to I will have interview also with people from N26, also on the finance in April, to see the perspective. But it's really, like you said, challenging, how to build up. Can you build Google in the finance? Is it enough just to be free? It's
also because there is also Google in finance, right? It's not that Google has forgotten about some of these, right? And is also playing there. And but that's the bit around partnership, right? So number 26 is a partner now for many years, right? Like we help them with the international money transfer product, right? In terms of partnership that we have. But then like some companies decide to partner with a provider that specializes in that. And in this case, they use Wise, like API, Wise platform. And some other companies build it themselves, right? Or and sometimes the other bit is, as we mentioned, Google, right? Like there are companies like Google that basically have accounts with every one of us, right? So they are in a position where they can distribute products and they can distribute services like at a different scale with a different level of control of the user, right? And that is, I guess, I don't know, like I mostly work on the customer acquisition and growth part of the business, right? I am less involved in actually building the products, right? Even though I know a bit about it after many years, but it's still to be seen how some of these Google, Apple, how they want to enter, Amazon, how they want to enter this space. It's clear that they are working on it, right? It's clear that they have a various proposition, right? But is on the marketing side of things, we don't really consider them that much because obviously they don't have the need of acquiring customers, right? So they have a very different approach to marketing and growth to what we do, where we are in a position where we do need to acquire a customer in order to grow, right? And that's why is a bit different than maybe traditional banks that are going back in some situation to play in some of these area, and or otherwise new players like us that they're desperately in need of acquiring customers, right? Because they they have to grow, and that's a function of the customer that they can acquire, as opposed to maybe players like Google and Amazon and co that they don't need to acquire customers, they just need to figure out what is the best product, right, and the most sensible product to offer them, right? And the other bit that I noticed is we have been working on money transfer for many years now, and it's far from being solved, right, in terms of complexity of the problem.
Yeah,
and it's probably why maybe some of these companies like Google and co, without having a clear focus on it, right? Think about Zoom, right? We were using Google Hangout almost 5-6 years ago, right? Why could it not become Zoom, right? Was there any reason why we need another new app to do roughly the same objective, right? And so often is also a matter of focus, right, on what you want to achieve, right? That's why some player like Google and Amazon, Facebook, they've entered the space, but sometimes they are maybe slightly less competitive than other incumbent banks, right, or traditional banks that is their only source of revenue, right? Obviously depending on how much each given bank cares about international money transfer, right?
But you put it perfectly. I would say, as startups and let's say scale-ups, in a way, no matter the size, unicorn, you still have to look for the niche, at least in the process of growing and rapidly, scale with getting customers, in getting our, let's say, blue lagoon, in blue ocean. But with big players, they already own oceans of customers. It's more like kind of account based, let's say, drilling down, which customers can we catch, but they can, we still are doing the fly fishing, one by one in a way, and they already can do the dynamite, let's say, in a way. But since they have so many things going on in this ocean, let's say, of customers, you put it right. I mean, focus, without focus, everything is important and everything is also not important at the same time. So in big corporation structure, you can lose the direction in a way. And
exactly. I think we're far from having those problems, right? but Wise is now not just the traditional money transfer product that we have, right? We offer accounts, cards, we have a business product, we have an API product. So the company has evolved a lot since we started, right? Where it was more of a one-off experience with a given product, and we have seen ourselves, just doing that exercise of going from, marketing just the money transfer proposition to acquiring customers across all different use cases and needs is already, it takes away a little bit of distraction out of the core problem that you solve, right? But for us, it's still perfectly fine. It's absolutely not an issue. But then, imagine if you're one of these big corporations. This is just a tiny piece of a very big picture, right? And it is likely that the focus could be, not as high as someone that just, and many people that focus on this problem, right? So it's definitely the case. I think most of the competition has probably come from people who have decided to address the same problem, right, or try to solve similar mission, as opposed to very big players or large banks entering the space. And some have, right, some large institution have entered with a dedicated product just to serve the type of customer that are more traditional type of customer. So some of them has tried and stopped because probably they realized it was not such a good idea for them to do it. Some of them partner with us, right? Because today we not only provide our platform to a number 26, but other banks across the world. and is growing, right? Obviously, I think without going into detail of like how each of these partnership work, the complexity of integrating platforms into existing systems is always harder than someone that is building a new bank from scratch, right? But equally, it's interesting because obviously the new banks and the new players, they don't have customers, right? And that's why often when people ask us, is this new player your competitor? Like I really struggle to answer this question because I always see, at least in our view, in terms of like try to grow Wise customer base, the competitor, at least the people where we want to get customers from, is people who have more customers than us, right? Or people that got really a lot of customers. If someone just started a company like us and they've got tens of thousands of customers, it's not really exciting, right? To like spend a lot of effort and figure out how to acquire them. Also because with time, I guess one thing that we've been that worked relatively well, I would say, is that like in terms of acquiring new customers, the scalability of this is really important. Otherwise, you end up, early days you do, targeted campaigns and it's probably okay. You do, you go on TV or you try to do like, early days we went naked on the streets just to make noise about our company existing, right? And today, like obviously it's not that we just grow up as a company, but it's mostly around the fact that it gets a bit harder, right, when you have like a very strong baseline of growth to really influence that by doing a very ad hoc activities, as opposed to try to run what works at scale and try to scale it further. So this aspect is quite important because it would, we basically grew significantly the number of customers that we acquire, yet we haven't built 5,000 people marketing team to do so, that is spending billions, right? Like we have done this in a relatively conservative way, right? And that's really important because A is important for like our mission, because part of the statement of making money flow around the world eventually for free also implies that we acquire customers for free, right? Or at least very close to that. And then second, obviously, in order to operate a profitable company, we went pretty drastic on isolating what in customer acquisition growth is scalable and what is not, because it's very easy, as a well-funded company, to spend a lot of money and think that is a good idea, and then realize that when you turned it off, that it wasn't such a good idea. It's actually not much has changed, and it's not just us, right? We have seen companies like Uber doing so. Like many companies have they looked very smart when they were growing really fast by spending, a lot of money, but then they kept growing equally fast sometimes without spending that much, or by like shrinking their teams sizably, right? So we have been very careful on that, and we continue to grow our teams, right? We continue to grow like our operation, but it has to be in line with our mission and with being a profitable company. Otherwise, it would be increasingly hard to justify to our investors, to our finance team, that we acquire a customer that costs more than what they generate. And also, it's not fair for other customers, right? Because we have a lot of growth that come from word of mouth, customer referring their friend, right? So they use Wise and they are amazed by the experience and the product and the price, and they recommend their friend. And it wouldn't be fair, I assume, to for this customer to have higher price because we need to waste that money on marketing. It wouldn't be such a good thing for them that they spend their energy to invite their friend to use our service, and and that would really not be fair for them, as opposed to thanking them like for having invited, for like referring us to their friend by giving them like lower price 2 years down the line, right? If we achieve scaling in one of the geography. I think this has happened. obviously this will happen over time, right? Our CEO Christo posts every quarter, even though right now we're not a public company, but every quarter there's like a mission update where we share our progress when it comes to price, speed of the service, availability, convenience, and coverage all over the world, right? So we have a bunch of objectives related to that. It's not like, it's not always improving, but we work really hard on keep improving this, right? And I think customers over time realize this. We have often times where we are very transparent when we do things like price comparison and this kind of like comparison on our website, to the point that you could land on Wise website and we tell you to use someone else because at this point in time they have a better offer for you, right? Which you usually don't find in other companies, right? The first time that we launched the price comparison service, people were literally saying, how could I trust you, right? That you are the one putting on your own website. It's not an independent research, right? But actually, when they realize that A is accurate, right? First of all, which is really important in our industry, because differently from other industry, it's very difficult to collect pricing data and prices, right? If you work for a trading company, it's very easy to get access to stock market data, as opposed to our industry. It's not many companies expose their price. So having accurate data is important. And the other bit, what they realize is that we are honest about what is best for them. And to the point that some people have told us that, when I was sending money today, I realized you weren't the cheapest, but I'm still sending it with you because you were at least honest about it, right? As opposed to just like, put a chart that is says that we are always the best, right? Which is like obviously not possible, right? Like we are relatively competitive and we have like, a good strong pricing offer in most of the market, but it could happen at any point in time that someone is cheaper, and telling people is really important. And unfortunately, this is one aspect that I'm really passionate about. In our industry, differently from other industry, the regulation around price is very loose, right? The regulation about fees is very loose. What that means from comparative advertising, but in general, like when people present a product to their customers, is that apart from countries like Europe, where recently, after years of literally campaigning for this, they changed the law so that companies need to disclose the percentage of markup that they have on the exchange rate. In most of the other countries, or in general, like most of the independent providers, they have very little incentive in showing the right price, as opposed to show what is best for their economics in terms of like intermediary. And this is like a relatively big issue, because if you're not aware of a service being cheaper or more expensive, you don't switch, you don't compare. You will never get like a mortgage, a credit card, a loan without going on Money Saving Expert, Compare the Market, this comparison website. But people send money with their own provider without checking and without being able to check effectively whether is a good price or not, right? And that's really important, because it helps a consumer, right, over time making the right choice, but then it helps companies as well to market transparently their proposition, as opposed to have this big slogan, free money transfer, or like zero commission with a big asterisk that say, hey, by the way, we make money out of this. We make money out of this. And so it's at the end of the day, it's not really true that it's free, right? Like it's just paying in some other ways, right? So I think this is like an aspect that we invest a lot, but over time has been really successful, because people at some point understand that you're doing that in their best interest, right? Even though some days you might, eventually suggest them to use someone else, right? But this is really over time, I think, is the right thing to do, because ultimately we, whether they end up using us or someone else, if we bring down the price in the industry, we're still achieving our mission, right? So it's still what we want to achieve. Obviously, our goal is to do it on our platform, right? Not on someone else's platform. But this transparency, I think, is important in our industry, which is quite bizarre to some extent. before Wise, I was consulting through an advertising agency for like HSBC and a few other like banks. And if you go in territories like mortgages, right, like loans, there is very heavy regulation when it comes to you disclosing the actual benefit or the actual cost of a product, right? Because you could eventually ruin people's life, right? If they have if you have something that is not is outside what the rules say, right? So in our industry is a bit different to some extent, but hopefully I think we can change this, right? That would be really good mostly for consumer, right? Like as well as for us, that we try to offer a competitive service.
It's really interesting, how you did some, how to say, purple cow, how I call it, how to differentiate it with honesty, with building this transparency, actually building that, but still it's your first choice. Even if they pick up the different service, they first go to you. Let's say, and building usually banks are having pretty loyal customers, no matter it's kind of changing. I would say once when you open accounts, Italian or Swiss bank or somewhere, it's kind of, I'm used to, I know it took me like 18 years to change my first bank account, before I shifted, it's quite a long time. I wanted to change earlier, but later, I would say that the shift is happening much faster. Would you say also this shift is happening with, let's say, with your marketing job? You're having amazing experience with scaling and growth of the company. Is it what's the difference? How different it is now compared to before? Is it easier now when you have so much traction, when you have people that trust you, or is getting saturated also?
Slightly different challenges, but I don't think it got any easier or any harder, right? It's roughly the same. It's just different challenges. In terms of like what we used to do many years ago, we had like probably less clarity on where growth could come from, right? And there was like a bit of easier traction, right? When you are at the early days, with having early adopters in any kind of business, right? Then these days is probably with in some market we have relatively a big market share, we have relatively well-known proposition, and so like from that standpoint it got easier, right? But equally then you're tapping into a segment of user that are a bit harder to convince, right? To someone has been using their own provider for the past 20 years, why should I switch, right? And so I think yes is like yes and no, right? Like it is roughly the same challenge, is just a bit different from like what problems we have, right, at this phase. Definitely I personally I sleep a bit better now that there are many like smart people in the teams as opposed to just a couple of us early days, because
you're a wise company.
But like you can rely a bit better on like processes and teams being there, right? So that's a bit that got a bit easier from that standpoint, but yeah, equally we have challenges, right? So I think as any company, as you keep scaling, I don't think that this is any different from any other company, but I think like without going too much into detail, is not any harder or any easier. It's just the same. Like obviously we are at a scale now where it's very difficult to compare some things to what they used to be. We see even with like competing services, right? They launch a new market and they start driving traction. But then we know already that at some point it gets harder, right? It's going to get harder for them as well. So like this is the only difference I would say. But in terms of, is it harder than before? I don't think so. It just, the challenge stays the same, right? I think it's probably the nature of our business, right? The nature of our, what has changed, I guess, is the landscape maybe in the marketing space. So there are a few big shifts that we have seen. Well, with time, like social became relatively important bit in terms of like advertising as well. as opposed to just search with Google dominating that. So that is the case. A bit of drawback that is the same for everyone in the business. It's not just our problem. Is with like the way these companies are sharing data because of all the various scandals and regulation is changing quite a lot. And so on the measurement front is probably getting harder for companies to at scale to measure some things that before maybe the platforms like Facebook and Google were returning us a bit more data than what they do now, or like slightly different aggregation of that data. But that doesn't change the competitive landscape because everyone plays with the same rule, right? So it's not that this is like a challenge just for us, or like is literally what is it like, right? And or equally these days, all the privacy work that Apple is doing, right? Like that might impact how a company measure things. So I think this is the only like bigger shift to some extent. But then at the same time, it's not completely a blocker. It's not that we're going to stop doing marketing because of it. It's just that we need to find slightly different way to measure things, which again is pretty much in the nature of the business, right? Yeah.
But since things changed a lot, since you were naked on the street, and doing using all the media now. But
luckily, I wasn't one of the people naked on the...
It's always easier in marketing. We direct people. You should go. But
exactly.
What are you most proud of? Let's say, what would be your favorite project, or biggest challenge that you faced, in process of growth or scaling now? So because I saw quite some presentation for you, from the last, let's say, 2-3 years on SlideShare and things. So maybe how did you see what are you most proud of or most challenged?
I think like the bit that we had to face somehow is slightly different from like doing maybe my job in an established organization where you have already a bunch of web properties that are built, right? So we joined and we started to really turn on marketing and growth initiative at Wise with just one page. That was the home page back then. And there was no any content whatsoever on the website. There was no any product that could help our customers. So I think the hardest part, which I'm relatively proud of, is that we now went from being just a startup with a page on the web and a bunch of advertising pointing to that page, to now we have like a lot of properties and a lot of portfolio of websites and things that we build. And I guess this is is a challenging part because sometimes it's not easy to go from not having it to actually building all of it. And one aspect that I guess we always try to figure out is that how can we scale this exercise of building a relatively big real estate on the web in an efficient way, right? As opposed to hire army of people to do it, but not because it's wrong to hire people to do it. We have part of the team where we need to create content, let's say in given languages for given market for given audiences, where we hire specialists to do so. But there are some other parts that with product and engineering we can scale relatively easier, and that's a big advantage because it allows us to improve and increase our footprint on the web without scaling dramatically the cost of producing assets or of acquiring those visits to our website. So this is I guess one area that I'm relatively proud of, right? But that's why we recently moved from TransferWise domain to Wise, and that's a relatively complex thing to do.
I wanted to ask also about this.
We're not there yet in terms of being able to comment on how did it go, right? Because it's still in the work, I would say. But the reason why this is important to is a really delicate process, because the day you have a relatively big presence on the web, Google is used to digest this large website that has got certain characteristic with a certain amount of time that they spend understanding what is TransferWise.com. But now suddenly we are wise, right? This transfer of is basically moving house to some extent. Is especially for people that do my job, is always a bit scary, right? Because you don't want to wake up one day with everything that you build being lost. So that's the kind of tricky part of that. We are in the middle of it, and so far so good. But probably in a few months we will share a bit more detail on how that go. And
that was quite a long decision. Or how did it go? Because I was doing also with English and last with Shanatoni, we were doing some brandings, and I know these decisions are pretty tough, to convince management to decide, and also to implement on the marketing side or the rebranding. It's tough, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely not the kind of thing that you think the day before, right? Because it involves many teams for a certain amount of time to work on it. I think from this experience, without going into detail of ours, I think companies probably need to get it right on why do you do this, right? What are the real problems in doing this, and then obviously the rest is a bunch of technicalities of doing it, being legal, being technical issues, right? Whatever this implies, right? That you have to solve, right? So definitely, I wouldn't recommend anyone to rush any of this decision, but then equally at some point you need to make a call on whether you're going to do it or not, right? So either way, you need to figure out probably what are the rules that are gonna make you decide to do it, right? There's probably more than, because the day that you decide to do it, it's easier to trigger the change, right? There's obviously a chain effect of things that we need to change, but then probably deciding that you're gonna do it, that's the probably hardest part to quantify and to be really, really objective about it, right? So this is not like a choice that came from me or my team, right? So it's probably something that's been decided across the many units in the business, but I think is definitely fascinating. And the other bit that I already know that is probably usually the case, but we didn't. People tend to mix the marketing side of things with customers, with the platform, with everything, and but actually the day that you have everything coming at once, it's very easy. It's very difficult to isolate. First, to execute it. Second, to isolate what is going wrong or what you need to work on. People usually they change the platform, change the domain, change the brand name, and then do a massive marketing campaign all in one go, right? And they hope that after this big bang, they will still wake up with a company that and customers that are still happy to use them, right? I think the only bit that probably I would advise to people is to figure out whether they can phase all these things, because it's difficult for people to for customers in the same way as for us, right? To date, I still call Wise TransferWise sometimes, right? And after many years calling it TransferWise, so is a bit of a longer process that one day announcement and like an advertising campaign to make people refer to you with a different brand name or understand why you use this brand name, right? So this is probably the biggest learning from doing it. And but apart from that, we are still in the middle of it. So probably in you're catching me a bit early on this topic, but probably in like I would say 2-3 months we should have a good wrap up of that.
So we can talk in the autumn, let's say.
Of that experience, right? Yeah, exactly. I think to summarize, for people who don't have context on this, and there's like a blog post that they can read on our website where we explain this, but is like the why is to reflect our offering today, right? And the fact that what used to be TransferWise and what used to be a money transfer company today offers like an array of services, like still related to moving money across border, but isn't just sending money from account A to account B as a money transfer service. This is why the change is happening.
Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, so over time we decided to do this, and personally I hope it's the last time, right? Because these are the kind of things that teams like mine, they don't want to keep doing, right? Because there's like a bit of like a risk every time that you do it, even from like Google understanding that what used to be this website is now this other website, and your website performing in search engines in the same way, but yeah, equally is okay, right? And
I'm just before this process at the moment, so we are spending now 4 months, before we even started. So
yeah,
we have still to convince the team finance that it makes sense, at the end, why you're doing it. It's a lot, like you said, a lot of departments, a lot of processes, but I'm expecting like 1.5 to 2 years, to in the process.
Obviously, yeah, it depends on the size of the company, right?
Yeah.
And depends on the operation that are going on, right? So one probably example in our industry is like the first time that Tom from Monzo came to speak to our office 5 years ago about launching this new bank in UK. He gave us a card called Mondo, right?
Yeah.
And it was relatively not painful, I believe. Maybe I'm completely wrong, right? But as from the outside, it felt that there was a relatively early day switch in a company that was growing, but yet wasn't well known, right? So if you ask, a Monzo customer today, majority of them know them as Monzo, right? As opposed to our customers that we have like 10 plus million customer that know us as TransferWise, right, for the past 10 years, right? And this is probably like one of the complexity of doing this, but equally I think it's possible as long as you communicate, as long as you're clear on why you're doing it, right? Like it should always be possible to change your name to some extent, but then equally then you have to evaluate whether you really need it, right? Or whether your previous name would have been fine anyway, right? This is the kind of thing that I'm really not going to comment.
Branding is special thing,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, with such a great growth of company, and you're improving of your scaling and growth, how do you see, what would you say it's your superpower? You like, let's say personally, how do you see what keeps you growing through the toughest days, that you say, okay, I'm really that's my best skill that I can contribute?
Yeah, probably without calling it superpower, but one thing that I have enjoyed all the time is that it's hard to get bored in a company like Wise, right? And regardless of how much noise there is about us in the news, there's always so much going on, like inside. And so one thing that always keep me excited and is the possibility of like having quite a lot of freedom to launch and test and do whatever is sensible and could drive a growth to the company. This is one bit that it was really that's why I left consultancy and with like for relatively large corporation to join here, because I hoped, and this was the case, luckily that's why I'm still here after 5 plus year, is that you have a lot of freedom to experiment and try things, and then equally because there is you are the one involved directly in working on them, it's quite easy to see the result of it. So is quite rewarding to see that you did something that had X impact. So one, you're free to do it, or you have the kind of remit to do it, and B, the day that you go and do it, if it works, right, and usually we try to get it right. You see the impact of it, and is relatively meaningful for you, right, to work on things that you see that have impact, as opposed to turn up at work in companies that whatever you do today, not much is changing, right? Or like you're not going to really move numbers, right? And obviously it's easier to do this in a small company than a big company. As we get bigger, But I think we kept that we're not a startup anymore, right? Like there are like a few thousand people working across like many countries, but the culture is still there, right? And each team operates autonomously against a certain set of KPIs, and within the remit of the team, you have a lot of freedom to research and like test what you think is best. And that to me, that's the most exciting part, right? Whether a superpower around this, I'm not sure, right? Let's see. But like this is the bit that keeps you the most connected to the job that you do, and as opposed to not, because otherwise you lose a bit the challenge. I guess being challenged is probably an important part of but then it's fair to say that you also need to be a bit lucky, maybe, right? Because this is possible because a lot of other parts in the organization are working equally well, right? So unfortunately, what happens sometimes in the startup scene is that you might be doing what I just said, and like you might be getting it right on your end, but then there's a lot of other things that don't work in the business, right? And then sooner or later it won't be possible anymore. So I think with the aspect of being lucky that every team that we have is pretty amazing, which overall contributes to make this possible, right? Like that's overall probably not often the case, right? We have seen companies that have started to build growth marketing team when we started trying to like tackle the same type of business, and unfortunately some of them are not there, in terms of where we got to. And I think part of it is like credit to some stuff that we have done, but then part of it is also down to the overall condition in the we have done it within the context of growth, right? But part of it is also everything else that worked in the business that allow you to be successful. Even though we try to be as good as possible doing marketing, majority of our growth still come from our customers telling their friend. So we're not such a good marketer at the end of the day, right?
And then our customers are, but that's even
more valued, but that's a good thing to keep, right? The day that is not the case anymore, you probably don't have such a good product, and they have to worry about, right? So like that's something that we try to continue to have, right? Even though
it's great to see that actually you're still feeling challenged for many years. Many times in corporations and in big companies, it's feeling, it's just you're just a number. And here you find challenge for yourself. You feel challenged, and this. I always also believe with the startup culture, if they can keep it, the unicorns can keep it long enough. It's so powerful that it's differentiating the whole culture. It's can change, move mountains actually in a way. Is it product? Is it marketing? Over the departments, and you find how to say you hustle the solutions much faster than.
Also, I think is down to the design of the organization as well, right? Because even though it's probably well, my team has gone from zero to being a relatively large marketing team now. The part of marketing that I work with, and but even in the business, we were like way less people back then, and it's down to the way that you probably design the organization, so that even though you scale people, you keep the same processes and same culture. One bit that I guess keep people quite close to the problem that they're solving is that rather than having heavy top-down decision, we let the teams work out what is what is best for them, and then we often try to do bottom up, get to what we are going to achieve in that way, as opposed to our CEO coming to us and say, okay, this is what you need to do, right? And like so I think this bit is important, and obviously it's not for everyone, probably, in terms of like some people prefer to work in an environment where there's a bit more guidance on what you have to do, right, and what is expected from you. But then some other people that really love this setup, where it's probably you're slightly more entrepreneur to some extent, maybe to have the freedom to build almost like a business by itself within this organization, as opposed to operate against a list of objectives that someone has decided for you, right? Which is, oftentimes works, but sometimes it doesn't work, and then can be extremely frustrating because these objectives don't come from someone that is close to the problem that you're trying to solve, right? They just come from some top-down decision that don't often maybe resonate with you, right? When and your challenges, right, and what you're trying to achieve, right?
What for the end? Let's say what is inspiring you? You have so much knowledge about many things. Wide perspective. Is something that you would recommend to read or to listen as podcasts or to watch? How do you stay inspired?
I'm very bad at reading anything that is longer than an article.
Maybe more on Clubhouse already, or just listening?
I'm a Google phone user, so not even on Clubhouse.
That takes some time.
I tend to. I mean, I watch quite a lot of like video content to some extent, even like on TV. Obviously not TV, right? But related to what we do. One thing that I ended up doing over time is as religiously as I can, I have a curated list of people that I follow on certain platforms, primarily on Twitter, that are pretty much what gives me news and what kind of educates me on some subject. And then, like with regard to my industry, back in time, we were really enjoying, seeing each other, right? Every other a month at events, and I think people will go back to it, right? Because there's lots of value in doing that. But then, like these days, we still have a little bit little bit less, but we still have groups where we can communicate and share, right? I think but most of my what I if you want to think about getting inspired, is probably coming from following certain groups, certain people, and then eventually if there is some content to read from them, yes, I go and do it. But rather than going with the objectives that, okay, this month I need to read 5 books, right? Around this line, also because it's not really my best. I prefer to do things in general, like my
testing,
exactly.
Learning by doing,
exactly. And then I do, like, on my spare time, I build a lot of terrible websites that like are really not useful to the web sometime, but it's good learning. So often I get to the point where I like probably get inspired to try something, but then I try to do it myself, as opposed to watch another 10 hours or read another 10 hours on someone else doing it, rather than me doing it. That's
testing. That's the best. Great. Would you like to nominate any company or person, let's say, that you would like to hear on Fast Forward, maybe in the future?
Interesting question. Does it have to be in finance or whatever?
No, in anything, something that you would like to hear. So, like, I'm sure that somebody was also pointing to TransferWise and Wise now, actually, as wow, it's an amazing project. And for me, all 7 unicorns coming from Estonia are amazing stories, to hear. But if something pop up to your mind, you can also send me later.
Probably one company is like that I know relatively quite a bit about, but is always fascinating. It's probably Stripe, in the sense of which are a bit far to some extent to what we do, right? But yes, is interesting company, I would say. And the other bit is, I'm often quite fascinated by some companies in Asia, right, that we know very little about, and actually they're bigger than companies over here, and like they're growing faster and like everything else, right? But unfortunately, like we're not so familiar with them, right? There's a bit of language barrier, right? I was in Shenzhen. I was like just before the coronavirus, and I tried to install Alipay, and I tried to use it, and still I couldn't get through the whole thing, right? And as even with someone guiding me in Chinese, right? So there are certain things that like probably would be interesting to have more sharing between, what is the Western side of fintech and the what is happening on some of the Asian country. But yeah, it's a bit harder, obviously, different environment, regulators, language, right? Like so. But that's definitely one area that you often, every time that you hear something about these companies, you always underestimate the scale. Like you always like kind of never heard of them type of company, but then you look at it and you're like, oh, it's bigger than my company, right? And how is that possible?
Yeah, I still remember, traveling China, and I saw, I forgot the city, but I saw actually a poor person actually sitting on the floor, sleeping, but there was a hat, and actually there was a paper with QR code, in the hat, so if you're paying, don't give me cash, even just, scan the QR code. So for me, it's like how even poor people can, adapt, and in the whole society, it's moving in different speed, how to say,
is really insane from that perspective, which is probably in countries like UK, right? Especially these days, I barely have cash with me, right? And I barely almost have a car sometimes. I often have just my phone with Android Pay, right? But the scale at which this is happening in China, for instance, I think is quite impressive. And the other bit, like as a tourist, I would say, unless you're in that financial system, it's very difficult to. There are places where they don't accept, the card that I have. I cannot open an account. I cannot there's almost nothing that I could do, right? So, and that is really challenging, right? And obviously, without having any particular opinion on why it's the case, but it's a bit different, like from what we used to here, right? If you have like a Visa or MasterCard, you can probably go anywhere, right? Like to some extent, and get out of it, right? Like buy whatever you want to buy as much as your bank allows you, right? But it's quite an experience. But I think that's why some of these companies are quite, and even in Singapore, I think there is quite a few. I used to play video game when I was like a teenager, right? As a like esport type of thing, right? When esport was paying zero, right? And now it's actually like a job, right? Back in time, they were giving you a keyboard and a mouse. That's it. That's what you were getting. But so I'm still close to some of this stuff, and even like Razer, the produce hardware for gaming, they have like, I think, a merchant product. They offer like wallets and other services. So they have a branch of that dedicated to fintech, and most of this is happening in Singapore, where the regulator is quite advanced from that standpoint. And I think it's really interesting, because you see, similar to how Google or these people would enter the space, you see industries of these companies that have like massive amount of gamers, and they're like online first, and they can provide them financial services in relation to gaming, as well as some other related type of stuff. So which is also another thing that probably is less explored by the traditional banking, right? As such, right? Where they're quite far from having like being in touch with this type of customers and understanding what they do really with money, right?
Thank you, Fabrizio, for fabulous input. I will now stop the recording, and thank you very much for your word and sharing with us.
Okay, thank you for having me here.